Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sukti Dital, and I am the Executive Director of the Bernstein Institute for Human Rights. It's my pleasure to welcome you here this evening for a program that we hope will be thoughtful, engaging, and respectful. Tonight, each of us in this room have an opportunity to exercise leadership, to model a way forward on how to exchange diverse ideas and opinions with respect and dignity, and to move the conversation beyond the mainstream headlines. We will discuss key areas of concerns and grassroots demands, shine light on untold stories, and create a space of collective learning and open inquiry, principles that are at the heart of the Bernstein Institute for Human Rights here at NYU Law School. Our institute is committed to the advancement of human rights through cutting-edge research, education, and advocacy, with a focus on defending dissent and promoting legal empowerment. The Bernstein Institute honors the incredible legacy of Bob Bernstein, who was a fearless leader and a tireless defender of fundamental freedoms and human rights around the world. The Institute was established in his honor and really strives to honor his courageous legacy, his extraordinary vision, and his deep respect for human rights. Tonight's event is part of a year-long initiative to honor Bob and to commemorate his contributions to the human rights field. Throughout the year, we will host events on issues that he championed throughout his life: free expression, dissent, and the importance of investing in the next generation of human rights leaders. We are fortunate to have members of the Bernstein family here with us today. And very shortly, I will call Bill Bernstein, one of Bob's sons and an Institute Advisory Board member, to offer a few remarks. Before I do that, though, I'd like to run through housekeeping and set ground rules for this evening. The panel is structured in two equal parts. We will have 45 minutes of presentations by our speakers, followed by 45 minutes of question and answer. We encourage attendees with diverse perspectives to raise questions and comments. And to maximize participation, we ask that you limit your questions to 1 minute, and I will take questions at three at a time. Tonight's program is hosted by the Bernstein Institute and is not co-organized by the law school. The individuals who are offering viewpoints at this event are speaking for themselves and not the law school as an institution. It also bears noting that the free exchange of ideas and open inquiry are bedrock principles at NYU. And while the university remains committed to an inclusive learning environment, it is a matter of policy that invited speakers will be able to deliver their remarks without substantial interference. The principles of free speech and inquiry are complemented by the principles of debate, challenge, and protest. While dissent may be vigorous, it must not substantially interfere with the speaker's ability to communicate, regardless of content, with an audience's ability to hear and see the speaker, or with the university's ability to fulfill its educational duties and obligations. If substantial interference occurs, which we hope it does not, we will ask the individual to halt the disruption, and if the disruption persists, we will ask the individual to leave. Our hope is that tonight's program is one of constructive dialogue. We really believe that what we can build here tonight is a way to show the world how to build constructively, how to exchange ideas with respect and civility. And so we are excited to begin. So now please welcome me and enjoy welcoming Bill Bernstein. Bill is one of Bob's sons and serves as the chairperson of the board of the firm Manatt, Phelps & Phillips and a leader of Manatt Health. Bill's practice concentrates on providing strategic business and legal advice to clients in the healthcare industry. Bill also serves as the chairperson for the Center for Democracy and Technology, chairman of Human Rights in China, and as a board member for the eHealth Initiative. He received his BA and MA from Brown University and is a proud alum, a JD from NYU School of Law, where he served as a Root Tilden Scholar and Arthur Garfield Hayes Civil Liberties Fellow. Bill.
Good evening. I'm delighted to be here. So first, on behalf of my family, many of whom are here tonight, I want to thank NYU team, particularly Trevor Morrison, who's Dean of the Law School, Sukti Dilchal, and Meg Satterthwaite, all of who've done just an outstanding job making the Bernstein Institute what it is today, such a dynamic and effective leader in the field of human rights. This event truly does honor our dad's legacy in ways that he would be very proud. It does a few things. The event and the Institute are committed to uncovering and examining facts, to an on-the-ground understanding of social and political events, to teaching the skills associated with international advocacy, and most importantly, to recognizing the essential role of individual human rights activists in advancing democratic values and institutions. I want to say a special word about one of the speakers tonight. Sharon Hom, who has served as executive director of HRIC for close to 20 years. Simply put, Sharon is a force of nature. And there's no one in the human rights community for whom my dad had more respect. For the last several years, I've had the honor of serving as chair of the board of HRIC. In this role, I've had a ringside seat on what it takes to hold a world power like China accountable in international forums and to support in-country democracy advocates as they struggle to advance civil society and institutions. Finally, let me make one comment about the subject of today's forum. Our family first became involved with China in 1976 when we traveled with my father and mother there as guests of the Chinese government. It was a strange time because Mao was still alive. He would die in September 1976, and everyone seemed to be on edge, waiting to see what would happen. As we all know, much has happened since then. The Democracy Wall movement, Tiananmen Square, the imprisonment and exile of many Chinese dissidents, as well as China's emergence as a major economic and political power. As I think back on the last 20 years, with all that has happened, it feels at this very moment in Hong Kong, we are at a tipping point, watching a struggle that will have enormous impact, not only on the Chinese people, but on the world order for many years to come. So I am particularly grateful to hear tonight from those on the front lines and get their insights as to where things stand today and the alternative futures for which we all need to be prepared.
Thank you, Bill. You undoubtedly make Bob proud. So thank you for your inspiring words and for your generous support of the Institute. We are grateful. I am now honored to introduce our speakers to the stage. They are human rights activists and lawyers deeply involved in the crisis unfolding in Hong Kong. Tonight, we'll hear their reflections on what brought us to this current moment, discuss the diverse strategies and individuals engaged in this, quote, movement, and explore the role of international advocacy, both its challenges, its limits, and its opportunities. Our speakers will offer independent insights revealing the complexity and the nuance of what's at stake. Please welcome me in introducing Nathan Law, Jeffrey Ngo, and Sharon Hom to the stage. So as I mentioned, we will have about 45 minutes for speaker presentations, followed by 45 minutes of Q&A. We'd like to begin with Nathan, followed by Jeffrey, and then Sharon. A brief introduction on Nathan. Nathan Law is a politician and activist from Hong Kong, currently studying at Yale University. As a former student leader, he has been the chairman of the Representative Council of the Lingnan University Students' Union and Secretary General of the Hong Kong Federation of Students. He was one of the student leaders during the 79-day umbrella movement in 2014, and founding and former chairman of Demosistos, a political party derived from the 2014 protests. Nathan was elected to serve as a legislator for Hong Kong, making him the youngest lawmaker in the history of the Legislative Council of Hong Kong. Nathan, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Nathan. First of all, of course, thank you for all of you turning out to attend the event and also the invitation from Bernstein Institute. That I'm very honored to be speaking here, and this is not in these 2 weeks, this is already the fourth event that I've attended. I've had a talk also in Harvard and in Yale, and those are a really good experience of exchanging ideas between different opinion and conducted in a very civilized manner. And I think in this is also a highly prestigious academic institute that I think the purpose of these events is to increase mutual understanding and increase our knowledge about the event and to let ideas exchange. So I think this is a great platform that we could all share. I think a lot of you may have a lot of questions about today's Hong Kong and its movement. Like most of you, if you have been to Hong Kong in the previous 20 years, it's been always so energetic, economically led, and also a city that seemingly is not that political. People have been trying to get their livings there and have been renowned as Asia's financial hub and a very strong economic center. But why Hong Kong now is in such a political turmoil that seemingly there's no solution? And 5 years ago, maybe all of you have seen news about Hong Kong's protest. That was the era of umbrella movement. People were so peaceful and they were demonstrating, and there were a sense of hope that they could get something out of it. They could have a political reform that they all treasure, that they all enjoy. But for now, the atmosphere of Hong Kong has been so desperated, and the sense of helpless and hopeless in all the scenes that we witness. And compared to 5 months ago even, when you saw the scenes of a million demonstration on the 9th of June and also 17th of June, we all see peaceful protests. But now, why there seem to have an escalation of force that, a lot of people are shocked by it? These questions, I think, are all lingering in your mind. And I think, in today's sharing, I'm gonna provide some perspective of analysts to help you digest what's happening in Hong Kong. And I think if we are gonna go that deep into it, we have to start with Hong Kong's history. And in the 80s, when Hong Kong had been through more than 115 years of colonial ruling by British government, that was the time that the British government and the Chinese government were discussing about handover of Hong Kong in 1997. But then there were actually a huge confidence crisis in Hong Kong, which Hong Kong people were wondering whether they could keep their way of life after 1997, when they was returned to Chinese ruling, especially like socialist communist China, whether they could bridge their capitalist system, market economy system. And in order to solve that trust problem, Chinese government and British government in the 80s, they have signed the Sino-British Joint Declaration in 1984 that governs the process of handover and also the ruling after the handover, which they have guaranteed Hong Kong people that their way of life can be preserved. There will be one country, two systems, that they separate two sets of systems even in the same Chinese soil, that Hong Kong people could still preserve their way of life before 1997 and had a different system compared to the one in mainland China. And also, they have guaranteed Hong Kong people several governing principles that made them feel like they have certain confidence about the communist ruling, including autonomy and democracy. So actually, the things that we are fighting for today were the promises made in the 80s, and a lot of like international organizations and governments are supporting Hong Kong's struggle based on that premises and based on the principle that has been written in Sino-British Joint Declaration, so that we've got a huge history or backup on such an international treaty that China has the obligation to follow it and to implement it to Hong Kong. And if you see there were 3 ways of immigration in the 80s and 90s, you could, of course, observe how serious that trust problem is, especially after 1989, the Tiananmen massacre. And after that, Hong Kong has been governed in a framework of one country, two system, and it's always the problem of whether one country can balance with two system. One country, two system could only work under the premises that China, they could decentralize the power and let Hong Kong to have a division of power to preserve certain autonomy and to preserve certain popular ruling instead of centralizing the power into the executive branch. In the first couple of years, that system ran well. And we all saw after 1997, in the first couple of years, people were happy about the arrangement. They didn't protest much. They didn't raise much questions about it because they thought that eventually they could get democracy in 2007 until the year 2003, which the Hong Kong government was trying to implement the Hong Kong version of national security law, which people of Hong Kong back then worried that it will quash their political freedom and freedom of speech. So that was the time Hong Kong people realized that, there's something wrong in one country, two system. And if China, they do not restrain the exercise of power, they do not have a sense of sharing power with the people, then it's not gonna work. So after that, even though we've been through honeymoon periods between the two places, especially in the year 2008, when there were Beijing Olympic and Sichuan earthquake that a lot of Hong Kong people donated, aroused national pride and national identity. That period of time was the golden period between the relationship of Hong Kong and China. It subsequently fades because Hong Kong people realized that their rights and their values are not coherent to the Chinese one, and the promises were not given on the basis of the Sino-British Joint Declaration. And in 2014, we could see such an outbreak that people realized they need to fight for democracy with a certain sacrifice. That was the umbrella movement. They occupied the role, they committed civil disobedience. You could see back then it was all peaceful, and there were some crucial differences between the umbrella movement 5 years ago and today's one. One of them is really vivid, is that there were no one wearing masks to hide their identity. They still had certain faith in the institution. They still preserve a certain, confidence towards the system that they did not arrest people arbitrarily. The prosecution process was legitimate and just, and they still believe that there were certain checks and balances in the system. But 5 years later, in these 5 years, we have witnessed a huge encroachment and erosion in our human rights. Let me myself as an example, I was elected in 2016, but subsequently being unseated by an reinterpretation from the Beijing government on our constitution, which all of you may know that if you are in a civilized and advanced region, that the role of the power of explaining the constitution shall belong to the Supreme Court or Constitutional Court. But in Hong Kong, is the National People's, the Standing Committee of National People Congress, a bunch of people who decide things because of political interest and political intention to explain our constitution in order to apply political pressure. And that was such a contentious topic that Hong Kong local legal sector were protesting about it. And I lost my seat, and the people's mandate was overturned. And also I was imprisoned because of my role in the peaceful demonstration. And that was considered one of the most serious human rights infringement and political suppression back then. So you could see people in Hong Kong in the past 5 years, they experienced a sense of their institution keep failing, and the institution keep like losing its checks and balances, and the rights of them are being deprived. So 5 years after the umbrella movement, for now, we have witnessed an explosion of anger. And it's kind of like an accumulation of all the human rights encroachment for the past 5 years. And for now, people started to feel like the institution failed everyone, especially in the way that they can hold the power, executive branch, and especially the police force accountable. And we've seen 4,500 of protesters are arrested, but none of the police are in any form of investigation, given that there are numerous proof that they have conducted excessive brutality on the protesters. And the one on last Monday who shot 2 barehanded protesters in their chest, that particular police officer was still not in any form of investigation, and the police department has not apologized for any misconduct in the past 5 months. So you can see this is an obvious evidence of such institutional failure in holding them accountable. And that is the reason why the situation for the past 5 months didn't quiet down, didn't die down. Reversely, it keeps keeps fueled by the response of the government, and the use of force and confrontation escalated. So I think this is pretty much the basic background to understanding what we are facing now and why situation escalated for the past 5 months. And if later on we've got some time, I would like to share my insights in terms of how we resolve that and in the future of the movement.
Great. Thank you so much, Nathan. That was very helpful in terms of setting historical context and the underpinnings of the why. I'm now going to shift to Jeffrey No. Jeffrey is a writer, a historian, and a pro-democracy activist based in Washington, D.C., where he is pursuing a PhD at Georgetown University in history. Beyond his academic hat, he serves as the chief researcher for Demosisto, and he is also an alum of NYU. He holds degrees from NYU's College of Arts and Sciences and the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. Thank you, Jeffrey, for being here.
Okay. Hi. Okay. Thanks for having me, and it's always good to be back to NYU. Graduated in 2016, and then again in 2017. I've actually never been in this room before, and not that many opportunities to come to the law school. So this is a good time to be here. Nathan has set out the sort of the context in terms of where we are today, and sort of my contribution to this panel, I hope, is to talk a bit more about the international front and how Hong Kong sort of fits into a globalized context today. Our event today is about the uses and limits of international advocacy, and so I'm gonna sort of discuss that in my dual role, sort of my role as a researcher, having understood Hong Kong's history in sort of globalized context, and sort of my role as an activist in Washington, and trying to do the best I can to push forward legislation and also in terms of spearheading other efforts to support Hong Kong. I mean, so the whole idea of one country, two systems, which is the constitutional framework that Hong Kong is supposed to be under, for some of you, you may know, it was actually designed by Deng Xiaoping in the early 1980s, I believe 1980 or 1981. And initially, it was a framework used for Taiwan. And so today I'm actually going to focus a bit on Taiwan and the U.S. And the idea really was that back at the time when Taiwan was still ruled under martial law by the KMT, the Chiang Kai-shek and later his son, the Chiang family, actually thought that one day they would sort of return to the mainland, and so they insisted that they were the legitimate China, and obviously the communist regime based in Beijing, they also insisted that they were the rightful sort of regime governing China. So there was actually no disagreement between the two of them in terms of both belonging to one nation state. They just disagreed in terms of which government had the legitimacy. And so it was always the goal of the Chinese Communist Party to unify both sides of the strait. And one country, two systems was supposed to be the framework for that. But Taiwan did not accept it at the time. And so later on, by the time of 1982, when the Sino-British negotiations began, a different version of one country, two systems was put forward, and eventually that was the deal that was agreed by the Chinese and the British governments behind closed doors, without participation, meaningful participation from Hong Kongers. And so as a former colony and as a former colonized subjects, Hong Kongers have lost the right of self-determination that was guaranteed by international law under the UN, various UN documents. And this is what we really mean when we talk about self-determination today. It was that as a colonized people, we lost that chance to decide our future, and we want to be able to have that say when 2047 comes around, which is the year that the 50-year no-change policy is set to expire, and which neither the Sino-British Joint Declaration of 1984 nor the Basic Law, which is our constitution, constitutional document of 1990, neither of those documents actually say anything about Hong Kong's post-2047 future. And subsequently then in the Sino-Portuguese negotiations over Macau's future, that framework was used again, and hence Hong Kong and Macau are the two sort of special administrative regions today in the People's Republic of China. So we could sort of understand that Hong Kong's past has always been very globalized. It was colonized in 1841 actually by the British Empire. It was developed as a free port. Where merchants from both China and the West were able to trade. And in the 1980s, actually, when the British government and the Chinese government concluded that deal that governed Hong Kong's post-1997 future, in order to ensure that that deal had the legitimacy in the eyes of the international community, both governments, but actually especially the Chinese government, lobbied very hard for the support of other governments so that they could endorse this treaty. And this treaty is also registered at the United Nations. So actually, the international community, does have a stake in Hong Kong, continues to have a stake in Hong Kong, which remains a international financial center. But also in terms of international law, that they have the responsibility and the right to hold China accountable to something that the Chinese government has agreed to. One of the governments that the Beijing regime actually lobbied very hard to endorse the joint declaration was the U.S. government, and so a piece of legislation was signed into law by President George H.W. Bush in 1992, the U.S. Hong Kong Policy Act, and that is the piece of legislation that has since governed the relationship between U.S. and Hong Kong. So, under U.S. law, America also has its obligations to ensure that the promises that the Chinese government has made is being met, and also that there should be responses to changing circumstances should Hong Kong's autonomy be lost. And this is what brings me to 2014, 5 years ago, when the umbrella movement broke out in Hong Kong. As many of you would know, that movement was broke out because Hong Kongers demanded genuine universal suffrage, and for the third time, the Beijing government had denied that to the people of Hong Kong. And at the time, I was actually in Washington. I was for NYU students here, you would know that there's a NYU DC campus. I was actually, that was my study away semester there. And it coincided with the outbreak of the umbrella movement. And at the time, there was a new piece of legislation that was introduced by members of Congress, the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. It was actually introduced by New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith, and now retired Congressman from Virginia, Frank Wolf. Both of them have been champions of human rights in China for a very long time, and those names should be familiar with some of you here. Minority Leader at the time, Nancy Pelosi, was also one of the original co-sponsors of the bill, and so that was sort of my starting point in terms of trying to advocate for the rights of Hong Kong in Washington. The very first member of Congress I met, I recall 5 years ago at the time, was Congressman Wolf. And after the Umbrella Movement, I met Nathan actually in the U.S. When it was his first time coming to Washington, and then also in 2015, the same year, Joshua Wong also came to Washington for the first time, and we sort of took on this project to fight for our rights in the U.S. And trying to use sort of the mechanism that the U.S. government has to ensure that China is held accountable to those promises. And the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act was the most important piece of that work. And we've been through up and downs over the past 5 years. There were moments in Hong Kong, after 2016, especially when we would, sort of consider it sort of our low point in our civil society, when the civil society in Hong Kong was really affected by deep divisions, by a lot of infighting. And there were events that there were the kidnapping of the booksellers, the removal of the Financial Times editor. There were new infrastructure projects that facilitated Hong Kong-China sort of connections. It was really not a very good time for the opposition in Hong Kong, and we were really worried that things were just going to go downhill. And that sort of dynamics was reflected in Washington as well, when for 3-4 years the piece of legislation, it was always the same senators and members of Congress who championed that bill, but it never really gained traction. It was a low moment really. But everything changed, in the past, since actually this past spring, when the sort of extradition bill controversy was building up, and there was renewed attention on Hong Kong and Washington, and hence the fourth time it was introduced, the bill was introduced was actually June 13. So just 4 days after the 1 million strong march in Hong Kong against the extradition bill, and the immediate day after the very big clashes outside the Hong Kong Legislative Council on July 12, that the bill was reintroduced with a much stronger lineup of co-sponsors. In September 25th, actually, on the same day, it moved past committee in both the House and the Senate. Very first time it has happened in 5 years. And then on October 15th, a little over a month ago, it passed unanimously the House of Representatives. And I recall I was watching C-SPAN on live. I wasn't in the Congress in person, but I was watching that. And Nancy Pelosi, who was now the Speaker, she gave a very moving speech in terms of how much work that she's done in the past number of decades advocating human rights, not just in Hong Kong, but also in China more broadly. She was actually, some of you might know this, she was actually arrested in 1991 protesting at Tiananmen Square with 2 other members of Congress. So she's really been with us for so long, and in Hong Kong, our sort of older generation of democracy advocates, Anson Chan and Martin Lee, also have known her for many decades. And it's sort of the past month or so, the bill was stalled in the Senate. And that was what we really were trying to do in terms of getting that through. And there was finally a turning point last week, actually, when Senator Rubio, who is the author of the bill, and Jim Risch, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee chairman, actually managed to convince the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to hotline the bill in the Senate. and that was put in place last Thursday. As of today, there was no holds in the hotline, and I believe literally half an hour before this talk began, I was reading on Twitter, Senator Rubio told the press that he's expecting that the bill would be passed unanimously tomorrow. So it's... Yeah, so that, I mean, so many people has put in hard work. Just naming everybody who has done work to push forward this piece of legislation would take up a whole hour in and of itself. So I won't go into all the people that I have to thank. But right now, then the next step sort of is that the House and the Senate would have to form a small committee to reconcile the small differences between the two versions of the bill, and if both are passed unanimously, it will be sent to the White House. I don't think the president will veto it, but even if he is unwilling to sign it, it will become law because it's passed a 2/3 supermajority in both houses of the Congress. So this is what's basically been happening in Washington. And I really do think that there are many ways that with this piece of legislation that the U.S. government can hold the Chinese government accountable for those promises that is made. But in a more symbolic sense, it really was this sort of shift is what we're seeing is a new bipartisan consensus that have emerged for decades now. Some would argue as early as 1972 when President Richard Nixon visited China for the first time, that the prevailing wisdom in Washington across the political aisle is that engagement with China would lead to more freedom in the mainland, and that's because capitalism, economic freedom would eventually lead to political freedom. That was sort of the prevailing wisdom as well when, even after the Tiananmen massacre of 1989, under Bush, they continued, the U.S. continued to trade with China. Under President Clinton, there were MFN status granted, normalized permanent trade relations, welcomed China into the WTO, and that continued through even the Obama period. What we're seeing right now with the presidency of Donald Trump is that there's increasing tensions between U.S. and China. The way that he's pursuing his goal is through a trade war. And you may or may not agree with that as being the best way to handle the relationship between the two countries. But I think what we cannot deny is that what he has done has been to question this prevailing wisdom. And what we're seeing is a new bipartisan consensus that have emerged, whereas the old piece of legislation, the U.S. Hong Kong Policy Act in 1992, as I was talking about earlier, that was really about economic ties and cultural ties between Hong Kong and U.S. The idea was that even after 1997, that relations would continue. Both China and U.S. could benefit economically from the status of Hong Kong because both sides had an understanding that the autonomy of Hong Kong would be preserved. And because then that has turned out to be not the case, and by this point we are well aware that there needs to be new change in terms of policy, and the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act in the symbolic sense really does that, because it's saying that from now on the U.S. policy on Hong Kong is not going to be driven by trade. It's not going to be driven by cultural ties. It's going to be driven by American values and universal values, including freedom, including democracy, human rights, and this is sort of the new direction that is going. And I would just the last thing I would want to say before I hand over to Sharon is that we're seeing that this is bipartisan consensus. Republicans talk about this. Democrats talk about this. The Democratic primaries right now in the 2020, we see candidates speak out for Hong Kong as well. So it's really not an issue of left and right, as I always say, and as Joshua also always say, but an issue about right and wrong. And so there are many ways that the Hong Kong issue is playing out in the U.S. Presidential election, and also the Taiwanese presidential election as well. Hong Kong has emerged as a very important issue. So these are the ways that Hong Kong fits into the global context, and I can probably talk more about that later on in the Q&A, but this is sort of the overview.
Thank you, Jeffrey. To achieve bipartisan consensus is remarkable. I'll just leave it there.
Can we say? Yes, I would leave it there.
Yes. So now on to Sharon Hom. Sharon is an adjunct professor of law at NYU School of Law and visiting professor at Hong Kong University Law School. She's professor of law emeritus at CUNY School of Law, where she taught for 18 years, including training judges, lawyers, and law teachers in China. In addition to her academic activities, Sharon is the executive director of Human Rights in China and leads their human rights, media advocacy, and strategic policy engagement with NGOs, governments, and multi-stakeholder initiatives since 2003. Sharon is also an alum of the law school and was a Root Tilden scholar. Over to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Suti. Thank you to the law school and to the Bernstein Institute and to the Bernstein family for this incredible support for human rights in China and for the work that we're doing in China. I also want to thank all of you because, as you can see, Hong Kong is very much in the media and very much of great concern to all of us. And so I think we really welcome the concern and the interest and the opportunity to talk about and to share thoughts about how we can move out of the current crisis. I also, because Bob Bernstein was a very dear friend and supporter, I think Bob would have, as might have been already alluded to, would love this. For those of you who didn't have the chance to meet him, he was extraordinary, and he loved and he never shied away from a difficult issue or conflict. As a matter of fact, he embraced it. As a matter of fact, he ran for it. So I think he would be very proud of us that we're attacking a very difficult, complex situation in Hong Kong and that we're thinking about how to do it together. So thank you. I want to speak as both as a human rights lawyer and a practitioner. I'm also, as Suti said, an alum of the law school, but it was like several centuries before the folks on the platform with me. It was a long time ago. But for those of you who may not be familiar, Human Rights in China, the organization that I head, has been involved for more than 3 decades on supporting the development of human rights, rule of law, and on the mainland in China. And we've worked with lawyers, Chinese activists, democracy activists, and civil society groups for more than 3 decades, really to support them in opening up the space. And it's a very difficult journey that the mainland civil society is walking. We've been active and present in Hong Kong since 1996. But we really felt that our focus and our mandate was on the mainland. But as we can all see, the mainland and the future, the present, the past of Hong Kong and the mainland are intertwined. Our futures have to be a joint future, and that's why it's very important to have the discussions. I think we all start, or I hope we all start, in the same position, that we all do not condone violence. I think we're also in the same platform to say we need to figure out a way to de-escalate what is clearly an alarming escalation of violence in Hong Kong. It is a crisis, a political crisis, a social crisis, and a humanitarian crisis. I was teaching there until last week when I came back, and being on the campus, I was able to see very powerfully the feeling and the atmosphere on the campus for the students and my students. I teach in the LLM intensive law program. My class, my intensive seminar was quite diverse. I had people in my class, mainland Chinese, law enforcement, a doctor, a journalist. So while all this was happening, my class was happening as well in the evening, because all of my students work during the day, and they would come in the evening, and mostly, sometimes quite traumatized, but they did the reading, did the preparation, and we, had the discussion. I would say, "Did you do the reading?" And they did the reading. So that was 30 hours of a seminar in 2 weeks. What you're not reading about didn't get an adequate coverage, because some of you might have heard this expression for headlines in newspapers. If it bleeds, it leads, which means they want the sensational, because that's what grabs people. But some of the things that are happening on the ground are not headlines. So can you imagine a headline like this? A group of law students organize a community platform to try to explore constructive different strategies, and 150 show up from age teenage to over 70, and that they all talked for 6 hours and developed 8 streams of work. Can you imagine a headline like that? How many of you would read that? You'd go, "Bleh, no. Give us the really the provocative stuff." So one of the things that was quite frustrating for me on the ground was that I really saw and worked with young people and old people like myself, who were really trying to grapple with a very difficult, volatile, fast developing situation on the ground. And so I want to use that as a way to jump into my first point, which is that it is a very complex situation. And even as we're writing or talking about it, it's developing right now. It's changing right now as we're trying to talk about it. And so my first point is, I think we should start having the conversation by first acknowledging that all of us have limited knowledge and understanding of what's going on. So let's start with trying to figure out, well, what do we know? What do we not know? Why is that important? So that's my first point. That's the challenge of being in a law school here, the challenge of evidence-based analysis. Let's try to have a conversation and the analysis based on evidence. Now here's the problem and here's the challenge. The challenge is that, as I said, first of all, for doing international advocacy work, is that I'm interviewed a lot by international media as well. And I'm so surprised by the way in which the conversation and the questions have so many assumptions, lots of assumptions, which I find, and I'm terrible in these interviews, because I should just go, well, I should just answer the question. But no, Sharon has to do things like, I don't know, I think that's not a good question. Or I say, is that the right question? And then I offend the reporter, this is not a good strategy. And they will say, well, what is the right question? And then I'll try to say, well, I think the better question might be, instead of saying, how do you get both sides to talk? I might say, I don't think there are two sides. And then they'll think I'm stupid. I'll say, no, I don't think there are two sides. I think it's really much more complex. And by way of just saying one of the two sides, because of my commitment and decades of working with my Chinese colleagues and lawyers and former students on the mainland and activists, I really want to make this point about the sides. Here's a data point for everybody. Since June, up until last week, November 8th, 22 mainlanders have been criminally and administratively detained for what kind of things? Expressing support for the Hong Kong movement, criticizing the Chinese government statements, posting pictures that they might have seen, because they got it through the VPN, of what is happening, and using music as backgrounds to some of the things they're doing, and okay, it was glory to Hong Kong. Who are these people? They were ordinary citizens, activists, a truck driver, a writer, a poet, a lawyer, a filmmaker, and activists across the board. Where were they from? Beijing, Guangzhou, Liaoning, Hubei, Changsha, Hangzhou, Chengdu. In other words, these are mainland citizens in China trying to just simply exercise freedom of expression, which, as we all know, is in the Chinese state constitution, that these rights. So they were expressing their rights and their views peacefully, and so they're serving 5 to 30 days in administrative detention. They're disappeared under residential surveillance at a designated location. And what are they charged with by posting these things? Picking quarrels, provoking trouble. Some of them have served 37 days now in detention, and subversion of state power. So my point is, let's not talk about everybody in monolithic groups. I don't think it's useful. I think it doesn't help us understand what's going on. So the second thing I want to do is add some other data points, just so we can think about what is going on. And I'm not suggesting, and those of you who know me know that I do not think statistics tell the story. I'm not an economist, I'm not a statistician, but I do think we need some baselines here. So here are some baselines. So to date, at least 3,428 have been arrested and 449 charged. The common charges are riots and assaulting the police. Some other perspectives on these numbers. Of those arrested, almost 100 were sent to hospital. Some of them sent to hospital when they were arrested, and you've all seen some of the footage and everything. They didn't appear to have any broken legs or any other broken injuries, but mysteriously, while in detention, they sent to hospital with broken bones. Of the Yunlong, which most of you have probably seen, it was all over the internet, the Yunlong attack, where they were clear, white-clad, triad-related, over 300, had metal, what do you call them?
Metal bars.
Metal bars, but big bars, were just beating up everyone, anyone in the metro station. Okay, of that group, there were several hundred. 34 were arrested, and of those, 6 charged with rioting. We're following those. Of the 51 that was since sent, the 60 injured at Chinese University, about 60 injured, 51 in hospital. One of those injured was an infant, 10 months old. The other, I think, important is what happened, and Nathan referred to this, what's happening to the police. The traffic police officer who ran his motorcycle deliberately into the protest crowd and backed up and then wove in and out and tried to hit some more, right now has been suspended but not sanctioned or punished. The officers who filed grenades, and according to Hong Kong police internal guidelines, when you fire tear gas and sponge, all the other, they're called non-lethal, but they're lethal, as you can see, they've blinded people. You're supposed to shoot below the knee. So when people are shot in the chest, in the eye, and in the head, that is clearly way above the knees. So none of that has been, none of those actions have been disciplined. In terms of injuries and deaths, there have been reported at least 9 suicides related clearly to the protests. And they left suicide notes on the walls before they jumped, or other situations. There are mysterious deaths. There's the 15-year-old competitive swimmer, and she was found dead in the water. She was a protest activist, dead in the water, ruled a suicide. Many of the students, including at my university, HKU, have a huge like shrine or memorial place, and people trying to erase her name, and they've written her name on all the walks at the university, and they say, her name was Christy Chan. Her name was Christy Chan. And they put pictures up, and following the death of Zhao Xilok, the student who was unclear, the official reports are that he jumped and thought there was a ledge, but there wasn't a ledge. So he was in a coma, and then he died last Friday. So that was part of a lot of the emotional anger and grief that you have to understand. There was an enormous amount of grief and anger. And I think one of the things I've been trying to put out as a message is all the students, all the protesters, everyone, the message I've been trying to say personally is, let's first respect the dignity and the privacy of the family, because they have suffered an incalculable loss, and we need to support and respect their right to grieve. And so that's one of the messages. Another deaths, a mysterious deaths, is a young protester dressed in black was found with a head injury. Apparently, they said he fell. He later is now in serious. Another one died also of quote, an apparent fall. So what I just want to say about all of that is, the point about all of that is, we think we know what's going on. You think you know because we see so much footage, so much video, so many things online. But the reason why we really don't know what these deaths and what the causes and what the violence and what the police are doing, that's why it's so important to support all 5 demands of the movement, of which the most important at this present moment is we demand an independent investigation of the police allegations of abuse, because those have also been reviewed by independent UN experts who have also issued statements of concern. So I think I just want to end that by saying that on the narrative, let's have the conversation, let's recognize the complexity, and let's hopefully be able to make a contribution to moving past this crisis together. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. You left us with thinking about one way forward, which was the demand around the independent investigation. And before we turn it over to all of you for questions, quickly, Jeffrey and Nathan, is there anything you want to add in terms of what you think is a crucial next step for a way forward in this crisis? And then we can open up the floor to future questions.
Well, I think, as Sharon just said, one of the demands of the protesters, the setting up of an independent inquiry commission, is crucial because we've seen like overwhelming consensus in the society, which the poll data shows that there are more than 80% of people supporting that demand, and we clearly see that according to the statistic of like the arrested persons and the police in investigation, there's a huge controversy that the police are acting in impunity, and that is the reason why the escalation of force is there, because when the protesters think that the police, they could act without any consequences, they would like to impose deterrence effect on them in order to protect themselves from the assault of the police, so that there will be escalation of force in order to counteract the impunity of the police. But if we send a signal, the society as a whole, or the government, saying that the police who committed misconduct can be held accountable and there will be relevant punishment on them, then the protesters would de-escalate because of that. So I think if we're talking about trying to find a way out, trying to solve the problem, we act on what the root cause of the conflict is, and the police brutality is definitely one of them. And setting up an independent inquiry commission could also prove those police who have been acting in accordance to the protocol, a good name back to them. So I think it's definitely the next step of the society. I think that is the thing that we need to de-escalate the situation.
Yeah, and then very quickly, in terms of what's the next step, I think we are all committed to finding a peaceful resolution to the crisis. But the fact of the matter is, since June, Hong Kongers have insisted on the 5 demands, and those are the 5 demands that we still call for. One of them have been met so far: the full, withdrawal of the extradition bill that started it all. But no one's under the illusion that that was it, because the movement has moves beyond that one bill or the resignation of one person or anything. Is really structural. And certainly, I mean, we're talking about 80%, over 80% of Hong Kongers, not the protesters, but Hong Kongers as a whole, supporting one of the 5 demands, which is the independent investigation into police brutality. And of the 5 demands, even the one that are sort of the least favorable one, the full amnesty for the arrested protesters, even that one has support of something like 56 or 57%, according to the latest poll. So all 5 demands have have a majority of support from Hong Kongers, and really, I mean, is not because of the unequal power relations. Really, it's not up to the protesters to decide. Well, how are we going to end this? It really, President Xi and the Hong Kong government have to have the courage to say, well, we've created this crisis. We have to deal with it. This is a political issue. A political issue has to be resolved politically. It cannot be resolved physically, as we've seen, or legally. I mean, through just prosecuting people. It doesn't work. It doesn't get to the root cause of it. And then one last thing. I mean, in terms of big picture, what's the sort of next step? I think for many years, the sort of for observers of China here in the U.S. And around the world, at least in the West, to understand China, they try to understand sort of what's happening in Beijing, what's the decision making there, what are the issues on the mainland. But what we've seen in recent years is that to really understand China, especially the Chinese international ambitions, you should not look at the core but the periphery. We're talking about up to 1 or 2 million Uyghurs that are imprisoned in concentration camps, basically in Xinjiang. We're talking about intimidation of Taiwan. There's a big presidential election coming up, as I said earlier, in January, in 2 months' time, and China repeatedly making threats, military threats as well, and then in Hong Kong, where sort of we are. By most objective measures, sort of the freest place on Chinese soil, and this is the place where these ideas, used to have a platform, and now that's sort of shrinking. And to look at and Tibet as well for a much longer time, to look at these peripheries is a much better way to understand Chinese ambitions. And I think that this provides a new framework for the U.S. To craft this policy and the rest of the world. In terms of policy responses to China.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Did you want to add anything, Sharon?
No,
or
I
do
think
you-
we should
Yeah,
save
well,
time for the questions. So
Great.
I'll just hold anything else I have to say for after or whenever.
Wonderful. So we have about 50 minutes, actually, for questions. So team members from the Bernstein Institute will be, they're holding mics. We ask that you actually come to the mic. They will continue to hold the mic, but you just speak into it like in the talk shows. You'll have 1 minute to ask a question. I'm going to take 3 questions at a time. Brian and Tyler, if you want to just start picking folks.
Here first.
And I just want to thank the audience really for the respect and how peaceful the discussions have been so far. Thank you so much.
So I just have questions for the 2 student leaders. So you talk about seeking democracy for Hong Kong, but we've seen many violent cases happen and initiated by the protesters recently just because someone disagreed with them. For example, there is an old man was set up on fire by the protest just because he argued with them about their agenda. And there are also many local shops were burned down by the protesters just because they have some relationship with mainland China. So would you expressly condemn those violence against innocent people and raise out some specific measures that you would adopt to curtail those violence against innocent people? Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Hi. As we all know that Hong Kong is a great city, and thousands of mainlanders live in Hong Kong, and I come from mainland too. But I was disappointed by the professor. You said you condemn no violence. But this is what was happening 80 years ago. This is what happened to Jewish people. This is a so-called the Crystal Night. Also called the Night of Broken Glasses. This is what happened to Jewish people. And similarly, this is what happened to Chinese merchants, the merchants of mainland in Hong Kong. Did you condemn such violence? With mainlanders can no longer peacefully live in Hong Kong because we feel like Jewish people. We feel like Jews.
And then we'll take one more question, and then we'll pause to let
Sorry,
the
I didn't finish.
panelists-
So I got a question.
Okay, you've already come to a minute, sir, so if you could just be
One
very
question,
brief.
one question.
Sure.
Yeah. We demand an independent inquiry into the violence toward mainland merchants. Thank you.
Okay. One more question?
Hi. So coincidentally enough, I was going to write about this anyways, but I'm a Jewish American. And as such, I was raised with this fundamental value of human rights because I think that we as a people understand that the international system was built to make sure that other people don't suffer the way that we did in the Holocaust. And it feels like human rights and international accountability structures that came up after World War II are falling apart. And not just in Hong Kong and not just in Xinjiang, but also here in America, where we're putting children in cages on the borders and Trump is dismissing the UN that was supposed to be the vehicle for reinforcing all of these values. And it doesn't feel like we're a shining beacon on the hill anymore for those things. So I was wondering how we can push our anti-human rights government to pressure China and other anti-human rights regimes as more than just a way to stick our thumbs in the eyes of people who we're currently having a trade war with, and more as a matter of principle. Thank you, and
Great.
thank you for talking tonight.
Thank you. So I turn it over to the panelists to respond. I can quick summarize, or if you know which your questions are, I'll save time.
Well, thanks for the question, and I think we will separately answer some of them. Regarding to the incidents on the innocent people, and of course I think particularly that incident of setting like old man on fire, that was definitely inappropriate, unproportional. And that was definitely one of the cases that I think the protesters, they need to review that and to work on it and to grant their moral high grounds in order to really convince the others that we are seeking an inclusive society, that we respect all the different opinions, even though they are sometimes conflicting to each other. And I think that's exactly what we are doing. Like, there is no perfect victim in the society. There are a lot of mistakes. There are a lot of wrongdoings that like both sides could happen, but that is what exactly a protest could be, because these are the people who are constantly being suppressed, persecuted. They're facing like intimidation, threats of being assaulted. You could see that there were protesters who were merely sticking like stickers on the Lennon Wall, being stabbed at, being sliced on their legs, and someone could not walk again. So these are the threats that they're being imposed. And most importantly, we recognize that power differences, that these protesters on the street, they're very vulnerable. They're not being protected by the police because the police has been shouting them as cockroaches. They have been exerting excessive brutality on them. They are facing like a very exposed environment which gangsters and all the colluded individuals with the Chinese Communist Party or the police could attack on them. And they are actually fighting the rights, not for themselves, but for the whole Hong Kong 7 million population, that their rights of voting and freedom of speech have been deprived. So I think sincerely that they should, be more tolerant to different opinion. And the way that we preserve Hong Kong values, we have always been an inclusive and open society that like people come here, learn our culture, and understand our values, and that's what the Chinese government has been lacking to do so, that they try to getting our system, merging into them, regardless of our unique respect on our human rights and our freedom and our democracy. So I think it is important that we keep ongoing reviewing our protest movement. But on the other hand, we have to pay sympathy to them that these people, they're not people with the executive power. They're not people with guns. They're not people with a lot of resources that they could utilize to protect themselves. And with this occasion, I think. Yes, indeed, it happens, and I don't think that is appropriate. But at the end of the day, we are a group of people who are working on Hong Kong's democracy, and I think that it is very important that we remain united as long as the government is still abusing all the institutional means to suppress these people.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not a student activist, and I'm not even young anymore, but if I could address that question, sorry, but I felt like I would like to just add to that. I think that when we, those incidents of violence against people that might be perceived as mainlander, the journalist, or that old man that was set on fire, these are horrific acts. And I think those acts, so the question on the focus of condemning and not condemning, that's not the issue at all. For anyone who has such a horrific criminal act committed against them, there is a rule of law, more or less, still in Hong Kong. And what happens under that rule of law is that the police are supposed to arrest, which they have, and they're supposed to investigate, and the prosecutors then charge. And then they go through a system. But here's the problem, and this is a fact, that when anyone, not in that particular case, but in all of the other hundreds of cases, when an individual is arrested, the policemen, as a pattern, have been doing 7-on-1 or 10-on-1. That is 10 officers. After they've cuffed, the internal guidelines on once you've cuffed, you're not supposed to be kicking them in the heads. You're not supposed to be beating them, 10 people, of the person who's cuffed on the ground. You're not supposed to be pulling people's clothes off. So there are some real issues about rule of law and compliance by the law enforcement officers with rule. Second, since we're in a law school, we all care about due process. That means when you're arrested and alleged to have done whatever, you're supposed to have right to counsel. So the lawyers have now reported as a pattern that they've been denied access to their clients. So that is a problem. Then they don't have some of the evidence. So I think we should all be concerned about that set of, I would say, cases where it's an individual protester or whoever who commits a violent act or vandalism against property. The proper way to deal with that is within the criminal justice system, which has crimes, which has a process, and all I want to emphasize on that is people should be afforded the process and all of the rights. The other thing just I wanted to add when you were talking about context is, I think I have it right, was it the 70s, the corruption of the police, 1977?
Yeah, 77.
Yeah. So in 1977, I just want to give you a little bit of context on this, that the Hong Kong police force was notorious for being the most corrupt police force in Asia. That's saying something. And everybody was on the take, so that new officers would be given a Hongba envelope and say, shut up and take it and don't cause trouble. And since they were paid so little, to get 200 a week was another 800, which is almost more than, a substantial salary. So what happened was a commission was put together to investigate the corruption on the police. Do you know what happened? The police protested illegal assembly. Thousands on the street and said we're being persecuted. Then they went and beat up the members of the independent commission investigating them. And then they also vandalized the offices of the commission. Well, what happened to move the process forward? All the police, charged, not charged, future to be charged, were given a full amnesty to move the process forward and to begin rebuilding the police force, which took decades to build it back to becoming really one of the finest forces in Asia. And I have to tell you personally, when we were involved in 2001, 2003, when I was involved in other legal demonstrations, you know, we would be over on the sidewalk and the police would come and say, "Siu Jie, mo yi si." They're very polite and say, "Get back on the sidewalk." And you know what we all said? "Oh, mo yi si, sir." And then we would move back to where they wanted us to move to. So it is profoundly distressing to me to have over, you know, decades of being able to see the police be respectful to citizens, citizens being respectful to the police, that we are now in this situation. So I wanted to say that about the police. I wanted to say about the question, and I just want to do a gentle, respectful caveat that we should be cautious about equating one set of difficult trauma with another. And I think to equate what is happening to mainlanders, including many of my friends, students, and colleagues in Hong Kong, with the mass genocide, systematic, conducted by a powerful, full war machine of Nazis who exterminated millions systematically, I think we should be, I just want to respectfully say, please, let's be careful about equating this. I'm not sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I just think I don't want that. What I think is just for us to be respectful of other experiences. I want to say one sentence about international system falling apart. It's like democracy. It's like all of the things that are falling apart in this country. Democracy, human rights, and that system, it was never meant to be linear progress and liberal visions of how progress happens. It doesn't go like this and then we reach some nirvana of democracy and human rights protection. What it is it's a battle. It goes back, it goes forward, and when Chinese officials, and they do talk to me, tell me either publicly, "Look at the US, you're a Chinese national." I go, "Yes, I'm Hong Konger, I'm a Chinese American, I'm proud of it." But I also say, "Yeah, and there are real human rights abuses here. Don't tell me, a Chinese American woman growing up as a minority in the US, about human rights abuses here." I said, "I know exactly what this country's history has been. The racism, the violence. Don't tell me about this." So what I see it as is we need to be accountable and responsible in every community we belong to, wherever we are. And we have a big battle going on here. We have a real struggle in this country, and we all have to be part of that, you know. Unfortunately, for those of us who live in multiple communities, I come back from Hong Kong, I see the impeachment starting, I go, "Oh my God, yeah, I've got impeachment here, I've got the Hong Kong crisis." But that's the nature of what it means to be a member of different communities. So I want to say that it's a bad answer, but it means it's a struggle. And that's what it means. We will get the human rights and the democracy we are willing to struggle for and defend. No one's going to hand it to us.
Yeah, and then just to respond to the questions, and I said this just now, and I'll say it again. You know, we are all here committed to seeing a peaceful resolution to the end of of the crisis in Hong Kong. And the longer the crisis continues, the more more of these episodes that we don't want to see will continue. And I think then, as I explained earlier, and as Nathan and Sharon have said also, that there is an end to that, but really it's not up to the protesters, as we are fighting to defend our autonomy and for democracy, is really up to those who are in power. We can go on and on and on about these specific incidents that have been happening in Hong Kong. There's always like 10-second clips. How do you come in on this incident? How do you come in on that incident? What I want to say is that we should look at the big picture. And Sharon is absolutely right. I mean, the thing is then that, of course, I mean, setting a man on fire, definitely that's wrong. And I'll say this, that's wrong. And it's horrific. But so what I support is then whoever who have committed that act of violence. And by the way, we don't know whether that's even a protester or not, because there's so much well-documented instances of police infiltration into the crowds. But whoever committed that violent act, brutal violent act, should be held accountable according to the rule of law. But the structural problem is that we're not seeing that accountability when it comes to crimes committed by the police and also the authorities. I mean, no one in the government has resigned. After 6 months, not a police member of the police force is under investigation, and on the other side, you have mass arrests and unmistakable police brutality against protesters, and really, this is the sort of structural problem that we should get at. As a student of history, I know, I've studied, the Holocaust, and I know that part of history well. I would agree with Sharon, and I believe with so many of you here that, that sort of comparison between, what's happening in Hong Kong and what's happening in China even is inappropriate. And I think then to have a constructive dialogue, I think we should be mindful of the pain that sort of these metaphors can inflict on others, but I think then the person who asked that question is committed to dialogue, and so am I, and that's why we're here. I recognize the tremendous difficulty of this kind of dialogue in Hong Kong right now between protesters and the mainland Chinese. Unmistakably, there's hostility between the two sides. But the reason why I'm here and the reason why you are here today at this venue is because we want to have the opportunity to do what we can do here that we cannot in Hong Kong. And I think then, by showing up and being here and answering a question, I'm doing the best I can. And then I guess there's just the question, the question about U.S. policy and sort of human rights. It's not a secret that I have my reservations about the current administration when it comes to human rights, and therefore our work as Demosisto and also our Hong Kongers trying to defend our autonomy, we have really focused our advocacy work in the Congress because we believe that legislation is the best way to advance our rights and to build alliances in Washington in terms of what's the best way for us to move forward. And I've gone in length to discuss how the bill that we've been fighting fighting for how that's coming close to being a success. But that's not the only thing. I mean, Protect Hong Kong Act, a piece of legislation that would bar U.S. companies from selling weapons like tear gas to the Hong Kong police force. There's the Hong Kong Be Water Act, another piece of legislation that would impose Magnitsky sanctions against officials in China and in Hong Kong that are found responsible for committing human rights abuses. These are important efforts, and we want to focus on advocating our rights in the Congress because it's easier to find allies there, I believe. But by no means am I completely disappointed by all administrations. Many of us follow the Democratic primaries very closely. A number of Democratic candidates have been outspoken about human rights abuses in Hong Kong and in Xinjiang, especially with the New York Times that just published actually yesterday or the day before troves of documents that document the concentration camps in Xinjiang against the Uyghurs. Many of Democratic primary candidates have spoken out, and also on Hong Kong. I'm thinking about, for instance, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg. Actually, Julian Castro tweeted today in support of Hong Kong. There's Senator Booker in New Jersey, and also Kamala Harris in California. They have co-sponsored the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. I think then for anyone who is disappointed about the current administration, there are good candidates to look for in the upcoming election. And I think then that there are many ways that U.S. can restore its role as a global leader that is committed to defending the international system and defending universal rights that we all believe in.
Great. I think we want to take another round of questions. And I would just ask the speakers, I know it's difficult, but to get just to try to limit your answers a little bit more in the next round, just so we can get more questions in.
Look at him.
No, I'm looking at all three of you. I'm not pointing, I'm just pointing. Just because we do want to get a couple more rounds of questions in. So Brian and Tyler, yeah.
Oh, hi, Professor Sharon. You are keeping talking about the evidence, and you talking about those burned people or incidents. But just to let us to look at the evidence, and we have seen that so many Hong Kong universities has shut down because of the violence caused by the protesters, and we have already known that some toxic chemicals has already been stolen from those universities, and those shops and companies whose owners are from mainland China has already been destroyed by those protesters. Do you still think those are just incidents? And this is just one question. Another one is that, Jeffrey, you were talking about that the U.S. government has a right to give pressure to the Hong Kong's internal affairs, and you has already taught that Hong Kong is under the one country, two systems, this system, and you have already know that Hong Kong is just a part of China, and it's just the internal affair of China. And we have already know that according to the non-interference principle of the internal affairs, according to the international law, that only if 5 requirements has already been satisfied, and you can just ask, the internal affairs can be just interfered. Can you just tell us one by one whether these 5 requirements has already been satisfied under this circumstance? And if not, whether you just let the U.S. government to violate this international law? Okay, these 2 questions. Thank you.
Okay, and then on this side.
Okay, my question will be very quick. There's an opinion in Hong Kong that's stating that we can bring the police to, say, international courts or like international arbitration kind of things. Yeah, so I'm just like asking, what do you guys think about the feasibility and viability of this kind of opinion? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all for coming to speak to us. We can see, Sharon, you spoke about the many people in the mainland and from the mainland who have been supportive of the Hong Kong people's right and the protests going on. Of course, there's many other people in the mainland as well as from the mainland and elsewhere who are very much against. We only need to look outside. We can look at the Facebook page video of all the negative frowny faces about this talk. And I guess my question is for those involved in the planning and the strategy of how this, how the protests are going and how the movement is going, I've talked to a lot of people from the mainland and asked them about their concerns, and questions like fairness have come up. Questions like the idea that notions that Hong Kong is wanting to be different, wanting to be special, is not paying attention to the mainland, and that it's all these different issues that have engendered a feeling of dislike for the movement. And I guess, is the movement taking account of the mainland population's perspective and trying to find ways to convince mainlanders that no, this is a positive movement, that they should support it? Yeah.
Okay, so we'll answer this set of questions a little bit more quickly, and then we'll come back to you all.
So maybe quickly, okay, while you were thinking. The quick question on, can you bring the Hong Kong police to an international criminal court? No, because China has not signed onto the Treaty of the International Criminal Court. So that's the short answer. You can't just haul people in. They have to have jurisdiction. The second question on interference, I think that's a more complex, important question. I think national sovereignty and state sovereignty is one of the principles when the founding of the UN, as together with the other fundamental values. I think that you need to be careful because I think, frankly, the Chinese government issues a very strong, detailed, evidence-based report on the human rights situation in the US. I don't know if you've seen it. It's annual. I commend it to you. Cites a lot of Amnesty, Human Rights Watch sources, and they say a lot of things that I've just said, police violence here, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think the US has ever accused them of interfering in the human rights situation here. Maybe they should, but I'm saying that international human rights is an international standard, and every member of the UN has an obligation to address these questions and support civil society. So I think that if China raises it, I've always been concerned, and I go, yeah, but I think your human rights report on US is very good. You have to keep doing it. So I think we need to be careful about raising that, though I do understand that it is one of the major talking points for the China story, which they raised at the UN, which they raised at the EU-China, at the US-China, and to the media, and via diplomatic circles. And that story, as you all know, is don't interfere with our sovereignty, you're hurting the feelings of the Chinese people, et cetera, et cetera. You all know that. The fairness question and whether mainlanders' voices should be, if I understand the question, there are 3 levels of that question. First, let me answer it as HRIC. We believed way before this happened, way before 2014 and the umbrella movement, we saw that it was going to be very important to have mainlanders speaking with Hong Kongers. Young, because the old generation, we were saying, forget it, they won't change anything. So let's look at the young people. So we actually convened 14 conversations between young mainlanders living, working, studying in Hong Kong, and young Hong Kongers. Go to our website, you can read some of it, and I can speak for Mi Ling Cui, my colleague, and I, who convened those over like 18 months. It was fantastic. It was difficult. There were mutual, like this at the beginning of the conversation, some hostility, some misunderstanding, but we were committed that that's the process. That's what needs to happen, because there are only 7.4 million Hong Kongers, but there are every day 150 mainlanders who are moving to Hong Kong as permanent residents, and over the course of a year, something like millions, and sometimes in some years reaching 8 million. So I think myself and my organization, we believe it is very, very important to have that kind of conversation, and we try to promote that. So I think that's important. Now, that's a separate question from the movement. The movement, we should stop calling them the movement, because they're actually different voices, and they're actually debating that. And I feel that when I raise this point, I do have conversations with people in different parts of the movement. And when you say, should they, this and that, I think we should flip that frame. And it's not about a should. It's about that Hong Kong people have the right to try to figure out their concerns and their future. It's not about whether we can say, should you? They have that space and right. And as a human rights professional NGO, our job, just to be clear, is, unlike we're not a political party, we don't have a platform, our job is to protect that space and to enable a civil kind of space for people to work that out.
Okay, so so I'll be quick. The question about the sort of fighting between the police force and the students at university campuses, of course, that's very troubling. You know, last week it was the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Right now, still ongoing. That's Polytechnic University of Hong Kong. Yes, you know, the member of audience who raised that question, you're absolutely right. There are toxic chemicals being released as a result of these fights. The toxic chemicals actually came from Chinese-produced tear gas that are being used by the police against protesters. So of course we are committed to a Hong Kong that is less polluted, and as a result, of course, then I would support efforts to limit the use of tear gas and other weapons by the police. But the big question that I don't think anybody has an answer to is why are the police trying to break into the university campus in the first place? And I don't think anybody has a good answer to that. There's just university students there trying to defend their campuses, and the police could have retreated at any time, and they decide against doing that, and hence the continuation of those clashes. And so to put an end to that, I would suggest that the police retreat and the students could all go home. And then the other question, very quickly, in terms of non-interventionism, I guess I have already made it clear what I meant in my introductory remarks, but to very quickly explain, yes, Hong Kong is currently a part of PRC under one country, two systems, but the treaty that governed that handover in 1997 is an international treaty registered at the UN. Hong Kong has always been an internationalized place, an international port, and China benefits tremendously from the fact that Hong Kong is internationalized. Up to 2/3 of foreign direct investment into China are still in one way or another processed through Hong Kong. Financial institutions in Hong Kong, for instance, Chinese companies, they're listed in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. These are just some of the many instances where just to show how important Hong Kong is to China. Under U.S. law, Hong Kong is treated as a separate customs territory, but that is contingent upon the fact that China honors the promise of genuine autonomy in Hong Kong. So if China does not honor those promises, I don't think it's fair for China to be able to reap the economic benefits of Hong Kong. China can't have it both ways. And the way for the United States to respond as a legitimate stakeholder in Hong Kong, because of the American presence there, business presence, in terms of tourism, in terms of students there, expats living there, the American response to that is to reevaluate U.S. policy on Hong Kong. So actually, the U.S. Hong Kong Policy Act is a piece of American legislation that passed the Congress and signed into law by an American president. The Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act is another piece of American legislation that's being processed right now through the United States Congress. So when I hear the Chinese Foreign Ministry criticizing this bill, it sounds to me also then that's an attempt by the Chinese government to tell what U.S. political leaders should and should not do in terms of how the U.S. should, legislate. So if you, insist on non-interventionism, then I think you would be able to see that there's some contradiction there. And just as Sharon say, human rights, I think, is a universal thing. I don't think then we should all say, well, let's not intervene, and using sort of non-interventionism as a sort of excuse and a sort of blanket term to ignore human rights abuses. So that's sort of my response to that. And increasingly it may be not a very popular thing to say, but I guess then if having concern over the rights of other people, of self-determination, just basic human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, if that makes me a globalist, then let's be it.
Well, answering to the question of dialogue with the mainland student, it reminds me of my personal experience in August when I was announcing that I am here in the US to pursue my further studies, and the Chinese government launched a huge smear campaign on me in their Weibo account and all sorts of things, and accused me of there was a famous slogan, "You go jail, we go Yale," things like that. So accusing me, it's kind of like rhythm, but yeah, it's kind of accusing me of abusing the credentials of the movement in order to pursue my personal personal interest. But what they didn't know is, first of all, I went to jail. That's quite an obvious fact that you could Google it if you could. The second is, well, that's quite amazing that because I actually got the offer in March, and I posted online on my Facebook in March, and the movement broke out in June. So they are saying that I received my offer in March with the credentials that the movement in June, and well, it definitely sounds contradicting, but still, the mainland media all reporting in the same tone without even questioning the rationale behind it, and and there were massive mobilization of netizens, Chinese, coming to my Facebook where they climb out the wall occasionally to do things that they thought that they're legitimate to attack me, and that became a scene that I was so puzzled because I've always had an intention to really have a dialogue with people from different opinion, but seemingly the firewall in mainland China is just so strong and solid, and somehow a lot of people living in the firewall, they kind of internalize that mindset, and even though they have climbed out, they haven't been seeking opinion outside the information or news sources that they could have allowed it inside the wall. So that was kind of like a puzzle for me. And for me, it's important that I could have a dialogue with them. And I remember when I was having a talk in Yale, and a Chinese student approached to me, and he said that, well, I had hesitated when I was thinking about whether to come because that would put him in danger. So I was asking, what kind of danger? I'm not going to assault you. And he said that no, because when some Chinese students know that he's coming, then he will be reported, and that will put him in danger. Like families in China or visa because of having direct contact with me. And I was so shocked, but not really, but this kind of expected that there have always been pervasive reporting on how the Chinese students in the US campus are being monitored and being reported. And this is exactly the things that I learned from direct contact with them. And people with similar minds with the Communist Party, they don't feel it because Communist Party tolerates speech that in favor of them. But when those people who wanted to learn about more liberal mind and having opinion that are completely different from the Communist Party, then their thoughts are being restricted. And I'm just so irritated that we're learning in a free country that upholds freedom of speech and academic freedom, but there are actually students in the campus, just because of their origins and nationality, they cannot enjoy same set of freedoms that we are, and they are all being constantly monitored. And I found it's just so absurd that actually the higher institution sector in the US does not really address the problem properly. And I think that is definitely the responsibility for us to do and to help those that cannot enjoy the same degree of freedom that we are. And I think it is important that we learn that Chinese students, or no matter overseas or in mainland, they always have different opinion. It's just a matter of proportion, and we need to understand that our movement is not about identity politics, and our movement is not about drawing a line between you and us and others, but it is a movement between people versus authoritarian regime, people fighting for their own freedom and their human rights and their dignity. And I clearly know that, there are actually Chinese students in Hong Kong that are in the front line, and those are being silenced, those cannot be heard from Chinese. They are always supporting our cause because they have experienced something that they could not have experienced back in mainland. So I think, let's not draw that opposition, dichotomous understanding between people. But I think for our duty, no matter you're from Chinese, from China or from the US, I think for my responsibility and duty, I think is to get as much as support that we can get, as long as we share the same set of values and we share the same worry about the authoritarian power that has been expanding and the worry of the recession of democracy.
Okay, so we'll take, this will likely be our last round of questions. And so,
Oh, stand up. Oh, sorry. Oh, hi. Hi, thank you so much for speaking. So this is a very strange question, I think. My father is from mainland China. My mother is from Hong Kong. I was born and raised in Hong Kong. So when Sharon, you talk about Yuen Long, I started to cry because I'm from Yuen Long. And Yuen Long, what happened in the train station? It was terrible. I mean, you know, if you just walk in Yunnan and somehow you got bitten for no reason, and then the cops don't do anything to help you, I mean, that's terrible. And I'm from Hong Kong, so I feel so much, and Yunnan is my neighborhood. I grew up there. And so whenever I tell people I'm from Hong Kong, and you know, a lot of people, you know, they're very good to me, and they ask me how I feel about Hong Kong, and there are a lot of people who listen. But sometimes when, I mean, I don't really mean to point fingers, because I have some, you know, really good mainland friends too, but sometimes I get really afraid when some mainland people, they see me, you know, because I go on to do land wars in the city. And sometimes they come, you know, they know I'm from Hong Kong, but then the first question was, oh, what do you think about the violence that Hong Kongers are doing to mainland people? I understand that. I mean, as I'm sure as the three panelists mentioned already, we all feel terrible, and I don't think anybody should get hurt. Like, if mainland people, the store owners or the old men, they shouldn't be set on fire at all, and they shouldn't get hurt. But this is a weird question, but it's just, sometimes I get so emotional, and I don't know how to respond if someone, like, if this happens to in mainland, thank you. Thank you so much. If this happens in mainland, if I see mainland in a city in mainland, my father is from Shenzhen, and if in Shenzhen the police hits, you know, they don't help the citizens, I mean, the first thing I would probably ask them, oh, are you okay, you know? But I wouldn't ask them if, you know, why are you, you know, attacking people? I don't know, it's a really weird situation. It's like, can you please ask me how I feel? I mean, this is a little bit selfish, but can you please ask me how I feel first before you accuse, like, almost like my people of attacking? Like, how can I respond, like, without, you know, feeling hurt? You know, because I don't want to alienate people. And thank you so much. And I know that probably I heard you speak Mandarin, so you're from, you know, mainland. So thank you so much even for this. So I don't want to, you know, especially if I'm living in New York, I want to have open dialogue with mainlanders. And sometimes I feel really worried. I don't know how to even engage with them without, you know, being too emotional. So I'm sorry. This is a strange question. I hope, you know, I conveyed it properly. Thank you.
You did. Thank you for that.
So I'd like to ask, what would happen to college students in China, or more particularly, college students at NYU's Shanghai campus, if they attempted to organize a panel like this, or a panel about Tiananmen Square, where the mention of those two words can get people arrested?
Okay, I think let's take two more questions, and then we'll
Hi.
give space for responses.
So we already have the U.S. Hong Kong Policy Act in 1992, and then it seems like everyone is looking forward to the new law. But I'm not so convinced that the new law is going to make any change, because, for example, you don't have the police, you don't have a court-martial to bring China in front of court. You have no judge between countries. So how can how I should convince that something is going to happen with the new law? So this is my question.
Great. Okay, one more question.
Yeah.
Please.
So Professor Holmes, so I have a question for you. I think when you justify the protest, you quoted what Chairman Mao, just said at the beginning of the Cultural Revolution. Said, like, anyone who crushed a student movement will not have a good ending. I mean, Chairman Mao didn't crush the Cultural Revolution, but China didn't have a good ending, I would say. It became an insane fiesta of revolution, of violence, lasts for 10 years, and it's a disaster. But now we have another leaderless student movement with a lot of violence. And the speak men, and women says that they won't condemn any violence on protester side. So my question is, do you think this protest will turn into another cultural revolution? Like what measurements you would take to prevent this movement from becoming another cultural revolution? Yeah.
Okay. I turn it over to you all.
Okay. The guys are looking at me. Okay. Okay. I want to say something about the, and I don't mean in any way to undermine anything, other perspectives, but I don't believe any initiative is a silver bullet. I don't believe the Hong Kong Policy Act is going to end the violence or do a radical shift. So I think looking at any one intervention, whether it's US legislation, UN special experts issuing a statement saying they're very concerned and the police should be trained, I think you need all of that. I do want to say about Chairman Mao, I was saying it a little bit tongue-in-cheek during the hearing, but I have to tell you that a Hong Kong taxi cab driver quoted Chairman Mao to me when I was leaving Hong Kong this trip, because we got into a huge argument about the what's happening, and he got so emotional I thought he was going to crash us both into a wall, and he was just really like yelling and screaming at me, and because he was saying, we have to do this, if we don't do it now, what you got, it's going on and on. I go, okay, and then he says, and what Mao said is a revolution is not a dinner party. I go, oh, whoa, no, no, no. So I thought that was really a very interesting, and I'll use that as a moment to comment on the question I didn't answer to, which was directed at me about incident. I don't think any of these examples and cases that we've raised are isolated incidents. I think they're part of a very concerning, complex, volatile, in-movement situation on the ground, and I do think that I don't think any of them can be picked up by himself. And my main point was that we really need to stay on top of it, and we need to listen and read different sources. I tend to be a news junkie. That's why I don't sleep. I usually follow all different sources. I watch the live feeds. I follow Xinhua. I follow Global Times, because I want to know what different sources are saying. And I would urge all of us to also do that. So there's no silver bullet. I hope I wasn't heard as justifying anything in terms of a movement. If you're referring to the CECC hearing, I only had one purpose there in September, and that was that I felt that the narrative of violence, which is perpetrated by the official story about what's happening in Hong Kong from Beijing, that official narrative that it's violent and it's rioters, echoed by Xi Jinping, echoed by Carrie Lam, before the evidence, before the investigation, is putting a label of rioters, terrorists, independents. I'm trying to resist that and trying to say, and that's my only purpose, is that there is so much more happening on the ground. I can guarantee it. And lots of peaceful stuff that you're not reading about. And you need to ask this question, those of us who are now here and not on the ground, you need to ask this question. Why are Hong Kong people, taxi cab drivers? I speak to my favorite Paul, who runs his little shop, like a street shop that I always go back and visit her, and King Gai, and I bring her tea and we just chat. I talk to the store owners and I say, oh my God, is it really influencing? Because the tourists aren't here, my business is really bad. I go, oh, I think that's so bad. I'm telling you that this is not an anecdotal, but it's like I hear them saying, but this is what needs to happen. I'm losing business, but I know we need this to happen. So one of the things that I'm not justifying, I'm just telling you and sharing an insight that social workers, journalists, over 1,000 doctors and medical workers, trade unionists, why are they supporting the movement? And I want to suggest that it's because they have eyes. 他们都可以看到什么事情发生的，不需要你们报道的，不需要你们告诉他们应该怎么看的。They see what is on the ground. And not only do they see it, ordinary citizens have been harassed, banker coming off work, just police, rounding up 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds now, searching their backpacks. So they're seeing this. So you need to understand that that 80% support for an independent investigation is not coming out of propaganda. It's coming out because Hong Kong people are seeing what's happening. And we didn't even talk about the legal actions being taken. The masks has just been held to be unconstitutional, the anti-mask ordinance. However, the legal actions also have to do with doxing. You can't dox the police because that's a violation of their privacy and the safety of their families. That's a court decision, that's important. Don't dox the police and their families and disclose privacy, right? There's an important lawsuit on behalf of a young woman who was alleges gang rape by the police, and that lawsuit is going forward. There are lawsuits on behalf, so there's legal cases we didn't talk about that are wending its way through the Hong Kong courts. So I think that's also happening, but you know, I guess legal cases aren't like the most exciting headlines either, but they're also wending their way. So I wanted to point out, my last point is, there's a lot more happening and continuing to happen, and I really, those of you who care and are concerned, you know, we need to follow. I want to say respectfully, because this is being recorded, to the university presidents, I happen to have my own view, and I think it was a mistake to evacuate all the mainland students overnight. In my own humble view as a nobody, you know, not running an institution, I think they sent the wrong message. They sent a message that there's a divisive. They sent a message that mainland students were not safe. Instead, I think, easy for me to say, Monday morning quarterbacking, but I think what should have happened was leadership, to have conversation, to try to address that feeling of insecurity and fear, rather than to accentuate it and say, yeah, you are unsafe. So I'm very concerned about that kind of message, because no one should feel unsafe on a university campus. And to the young woman who shared from Yuen Long, I think that is the critical starting place, that if we want to talk, we really need to start by acknowledging the level of emotion of everybody, anger or feeling of distrust or grief or emotion. I think we need to respect and hear that, and I really do think that is the starting point. So thank you for sharing that. I think we need to begin by respecting where we are emotionally, and then I think we need to talk through how we can be supportive. So thank you for sharing that.
I think a lot of you may have shared the same experience as I. For the past few days, we stay up nights. I watched 4 to 8 live together with my mobile phone, my laptop, and my iPad from different sources, ranging from foreign news agencies to Hong Kong local ones. And we are all like have sense of traumatized in this period of time, especially when we are watching things happening, not in Hong Kong, but in overseas, where seemingly we are so helpless about the situation. And I was just received a message from my friend, said he was locked up in PolyU last night. I got the message last night in US time, but by the time I was checking my message during the forum, my friend said he was already arrested. And they have to face for like years of sentencing. And that particular person I knew coincidentally, and he was, always playing football with me in secondary school, and he was that kind of person who didn't know about anything happening in the society, just for fun, just like a teen who doesn't care about politics and so on and so forth. And well, there are lots of people like that around me before the movement started. But well, somehow I think all of you would have friends like that, and you have no ideas why they have come so far in this movement. They have put their lives, their future at risk, and fighting for things that you thought that they didn't care. You thought that they have no ideas what's happening about it, but they just became that active and involved. And you started to realize actually things changing in Hong Kong in much faster pace than we expected. and that you know that there are something very important happening, that these people who originally are very apolitical, but they become awakened and willing to fight for that with their own lives and with their own future. And if you look at the pool data, it shows how desperate Hong Kong people are. Before the movement started, there were only 6% of people rating the police 0 marks in a 10 marks scale. But for now, the people rating that has already risen to more than 50%. And the rating of the rating of the police dropped into historically low, and that's also same things happens on like the rating of Carrie Lam, the confidence of one country, two system, and the confidence of Hong Kong future. So you could see, like in such an atmosphere, it is very hard not to be traumatized and not to be like sensationally depressed. But I think for us, it is very difficult. Like for me, I only have one belief, that if Hong Kong now is really being demolished, there will be one day that it can be rebuilt. And by the time that it will be rebuilt, we will be in a much better shape than now. And after we have all equipped myself and contribute ourselves and repay to the home crown that rules us. So I think that's the momentum and motivation that really will push every one of us to move forward, even though in such a difficult times. And one thing I would like to mention about the bill is that I had a conversation with Bill Browder, who is kind of like the creator of the Magnitsky Act. And he shared to me a story that after the proposal of the Magnitsky Act in the US, which it sanctions Russian officials who has been who are responsible to the homicide of the Magnitsky and also like human rights violations in their home country. Putin had put revoking that legislation as the first priority of their foreign policy, and he had directly contacted Trump's relatives before the general election to urge them to repeal that once Trump is elected. Of course, Trump didn't do it, but you could show that how terrified these officials are regarding their assets to be frozen, to be confiscated, because these people, they only care about their own prosperity and their money, and most of them are stored in the overseas countries. And what I'm saying that is not antidote to solve all the problems in Hong Kong, but I think we could see it as imposing a huge deterrence effect on the government officials that could block them from further committing these human rights violations in Hong Kong without any consequences or without any worries. And I think that's part of the things that the bill could play in this complicated situation.
Okay, so a few things to say. First of all, I really want to applaud the member of audience who just shared her experience here in New York and also her background. It's not easy. Yuen Long is just one of the many instances. We're seeing literally mysterious deaths. In Hong Kong, there are arbitrary arrests. There are credible allegations of sexual assault in police stations. Many of the people who are hurt and who are arrested, are my friends, are Nathan's friends. Sharon probably know a few people who have been under arrest and hurt in the movement. I think it's very painful to all of us, and I don't deny that this is also an emotional thing for the Chinese students and also citizens in China. And I think then the best way to build a dialogue is to recognize that this is the case, and we appreciate that. So I don't have a perfect answer to that question except to really thank you for sharing your experience. And I think then it's a small step toward building an understanding. And I'm glad that we are able to do that here today. In terms of the question about the bill, I think Nathan really has touched on most of the points. by holding Hong Kong and China officials accountable for human rights abuses in Hong Kong, through what the U.S. government can do, by denying them access to this country, freezing their assets. I think they're powerful tools. I don't pretend that passing the bill, and that probably is going to happen very shortly. I don't pretend that that's going to change everything in Hong Kong, overnight. But it really does show that there's a symbolic change in terms of U.S. policy toward China. There are, periodic reviews in terms of Hong Kong Special Customs Territory status. I think these are real tools that this administration and future administrations can employ in response to, changing circumstances in Hong Kong. And I think.
Okay. Thank you, thank you. That's you. You are welcome. We do not. I'm sorry. This is not. You have already asked your question. I'm sorry. You will need to. Okay. I'm sorry. This is not your portion to have the conversation. This is the time for the speakers to respond to the question. We will need to ask you to leave. We will need to ask you to leave. You've already had time for the questions and answers, and I was just about to add. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that the conversation was thoughtful. Thank you. Yeah? What's that?
I haven't finished.
Let me
I still want to answer though.
Yeah, let me comment.
Sure. Yeah. No. No, I'm sorry. We had 1 hour of time, and I set the ground rules from the front end. We knew from the front end what the ground rules were, that we would take 1 minute of questions, and then we would give time for responses. I want to thank all of you for being so respectful. The majority of the folks in this room really exercise leadership. So thank you for showing how constructive dialogue can be. It is our honor to host this discussion with all of you. We are grateful for the courage, for the vulnerability, for the insights, and for letting us all be a part of this conversation. Thank you to Sharon, to Nathan, and Jeffrey for your fantastic insights, and thank you to all of you in the room for being with us here today. We appreciate it. Please remain seated. The speakers will be leaving first, and then the rest of us will leave. So please remain seated. Another round of applause again for everyone in the room and for the speakers. Thank you so much.
Okay, fine.